Yeah. I mean, it's Christmas, so we could have a Christmas overlay like that. We could make it look very festive. Have it festive. Why not? Why not have it festive? I've also got this little clip of video that I don't know if you've seen it. Hang on.
The gorilla studies. The gorilla studies. He doesn't rap. He studies and keeps his mouth shut. Study, children, study.
That was something I made as a kind of trailer for my thing, but it's Stokely Carmichael from a while back in the Black Power speech, going on about study and the need to study and the role of that for militants and revolutionaries. And, so I thought it was appropriate at the moment. If we're talking about education, working class experience in education. Well, welcome Julie, Riyadh, and Eric Harper. People might know because I talk to occasionally online, sometimes on streams and things, so people might have seen Eric's face before. But Julian and Riyadh I've known from talking we've been in a Deleuze discussion group, really, one of the A to Z, really, in London mainly. I know you from, I think. And Julie, I haven't met you before, so welcome, Julie. Hello.
Hiya.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. Not quite sure what to expect, but yeah, all right.
Well, I think that's kind of up to Eric. Eric's the instigator here, isn't he? So yeah, I think we'll kind of leave it to Eric to give us a guide on this. But the tagline I've got there is talking about working class experience in education. So I think that's kind of the theme. And as I say, this is being streamed on my Twitch channel, which is what I use for teaching. Come with the lockdown, I teach philosophy at the Free University Brighton, and when the lockdown happened, I moved online, but everyone was teaching on Zoom, and I found Zoom to be a really sort of place. It just made me feel like, oh God, I don't want to do this. And for ages, I'm a gamer, so for ages I've been watching Twitch and people stream on Twitch, and I noticed that lots of lefty Americans were streaming and stuff. And so I was using it as a way of doing philosophy in public and doing my philosophy lectures on Twitch and having people come along and all that sort of stuff from Free University Brighton. So that's why I thought it would be okay to do it here, because it's not like there's a million people following or anything, and I haven't even advertised this, so I very, very much doubt anyone would drop by. But it'll fit into a theme of other stuff that's on the page, so it kind of fits into other stuff maybe, but that's why it's here. And also, to be brutally honest, I have to pay a subscription to Restream if I want to just record it offline. I didn't feel like paying £7 or whatever it is just to record it, so you're doing it because it's free this way.
So to kick the things off, I thought of an introduction, almost like one of those quiz things, in which the question might be wrong and the two answers I'm about to give to the question might be wrong as well. But I'll let the three of you decide that. So my statement was that the three of you have first-class minds. Really first-class minds. And then now there are two statements to follow that, and you can tell me which one is wrong. And the first statement is three really first-class minds, despite going through a working class education and a lack of access to cultural capital. That's statement number one. Or statement number two, thanks to a working class background, able to see through the ideological framework of education. So I thought I'd throw that statement out to the three of you as a way of starting this conversation.
I'm somewhere in between both, I think. I don't think it's that clear cut. I think not sure you can have one without the other.
Yeah, I think I'm inclined to agree with Julie here. I mean, I probably dispute the sort of first statement about first-class minds. I would say my mind is heavily affected by the damaging effects of a working class upbringing on a person's psychological and cognitive development. So it would probably be the first one that I might be in dispute on. And I would say certainly the kind of working class background, certainly in the era that I was brought up, was one of, you can do anything. Had a certain confidence, which I think came from coming from the working classes, a certain cussedness towards middle class culture, and possibly a slight underestimation of how hard it might be. But it certainly wasn't a barrier in some senses to making some progress. I mean, it might have been in others. I think in my own experiences, there was some cultural capital. I did get exposed to some of the codes and learning and values that were going to hold me in good stead in academic settings to some extent.
But can I ask a question on that, Riyad? Because if I'm correct, you went to a school that was deemed to be the second most challenging school in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that some of the cultural capital was coming from outside of the school system, so from family, but I think also from television. I mean, I did grow up in an era when there was a mass culture, and there were only 3 television channels for most of the time, and so you did absorb quite a lot of learning, and you imbibed in the high culture of the society, often just through access to a television, and there was nothing else to watch sometimes. So school wasn't the only place where you could accrue cultural capital and social capital, I would say. Would be my sort of answer to that. I know where you're coming from on that, though. I think that's a kind of, that's a valid observation.
Do you have a position on that, Matt?
Well, I don't know. So I left school at 16 with just a couple of O levels. So I think I have 5 altogether. I got English and maths, and I did history. I know. I think I probably had geography and something like DT or something like that. You know what I mean? And I did all right in my English and maths. I got A's and B's, but I didn't go to do O levels, and I had no sense of going to university. So this is 1984 when I finished school. Middle of Thatcher and all that sort of stuff. I was involved in sort of support for the miners' strike, and I come from a left-wing socialist family, trade unionist family, my dad had actually gone to Ruskin College. He was an agricultural worker at one point and had to go to and went to Ruskin College. So that was probably the nearest I'd actually come to any sort of sense of university. And even that's not a university. It was a trade union college at the time. So I didn't have any sense of going to university, any sense of that, and I'm pretty sure I was not encouraged. It was not part of my school, and I lived in at the time I did my O levels. I lived in a place called Aywards Heath. I'd moved out of Sussex, where I grew up. I was born in Brighton, but I grew up in Sussex, and no one even mentioned university. Wasn't even, I didn't, to be honest, I didn't even know it. And my first experience of university in any sort of real sense was when I moved to Birmingham when I was about 18. Is just a hatred of university students. I fucking hated them. They were just such a bunch of wankers. They were so stuck up. They'd come to lefty meetings and give me all this shit, and I was working in a factory and getting home knackered and going to a meeting, and they make me feel stupid and small. And the only reason I ended up going to university is because I was arrested on the poll tax and sent to prison for a while. And out before that, I was doing engineering work. And when I went to prison, I got all my papers for doing lathes and stuff, CNC lathes. And when I came out, I couldn't get a job, and I had a kid that had been born when I was in prison. And I just got really depressed, really fucking depressed. And my wife was in class war, and a couple of her friends were actually in Wolverhampton University at the time. And they basically said, you can get in there. It'll be 3 years. They pay you. You can basically do what you want. And if nothing else, it will stop you feeling like you've got nowhere to go. Stop you feeling like you're just unemployed. And you're an ex-convict. And I suppose I was actually quite antagonistic to going. I had to be talked into going to university. I literally talked in because I was like, I don't want to get involved in all this shit. It will just mean I can't talk to my class. I'm an activist. I'm a revolutionary. It will mean I'm stuck in this sort of weird situation where my family won't know what I'm talking about anymore. It all seems a bit weird, and besides, I can't do it. I'm and eventually my wife dragged me, literally pretty much dragged me to the university where they were having a little interview. And they were willing to do because I had no A levels, so they were willing to do like a face-to-face interview. And the guy I spoke to is the head of humanities. After a little while, he said, "Well, look, we can offer you a place on the basis of widening participation, positive action, positive discrimination for the working class. You can get a place like that. All you got to do is write me an essay." I've been writing stuff as a leftist for a while. So I didn't think that was a problem. I said, okay, what on? Something in history, I write on the chances. And he said, write me a 3,500 word essay by next Monday. I think this was like Thursday or something. And now, when I think back to that, I think, you shitbag. You were trying to make me fail. But of course, because I was used to writing lefty articles, it was like, oh, right, the deadline, you've got to write. Okay, you've got to write something up. And so I could do that. And so I wrote that, and that's how I got in. So the whole entrance into university life was a complete, all that was going on was other people not telling me the truth, essentially, all the way through. It was just a kind of complete accident or mistake that I even got into university in a sense. And the only reason I got into philosophy is because they were the people that argued best. Everything that I thought I could argue as a lefty, because I've been involved in Trotskyist politics at that time since I was about 14. Everything that I thought I could argue as a lefty, they could defeat. They had some clever argument against it, and I thought, hell, who are these gods? I need to do that, and that's how I ended up getting involved in philosophy, because they could defeat me in arguments and make me look small in the room. And I sort of had this kind of antagonism to that, and just kind of like, no, I can do this, But yeah, the whole thing was a complete mess. If I look back on it and actually reflect on entrance into university, it wasn't conscious, it wasn't encouraged, it wasn't, no one was honest about it.
Matt, that's a wonderful
complete mess of mess entry.
I'm just thinking, just before you go on, it might be interesting I'm curious whether Riyadh and Julie's experience in any way is similar, different from school to university. I mean, when you listen to Matt talk, do you relate to any of that, or does it just, or is your two journeys very different?
I'll go first because I can see Riyadh is eating. Mine was.
That's fine. Eat.
Yeah, my experience was really quite different to that. I went to a school where nobody really went to university, and I mean, nothing was celebrated in respect of getting educated or anything like that. It was literally just going to school, getting through school, and then churned out the other end to become, if you were lucky. I mean, unemployment where I was from, I mean, the miners used to come and collect in my local shopping centre, the miners' wives, and I can really remember that really strongly because we had no money. The area where I lived, nobody had any money, but they'd literally be putting in 2 pence and a penny into the bucket. And that's quite a strong memory I have of knowing that the people around me had no money, but they were still giving money to the miners' strike. We weren't particularly political. I mean, I'm from Liverpool, so Labour. But yeah, I didn't come from a family that, expected me to go to university. None of my siblings. I'm still the only person who's gone through university, and I've got there's 7 of us altogether. That's not to say none of them would have been able to go to university. They just didn't, maybe didn't think of themselves that way. But yeah, anyway, to cut a long story short, school was a write-off. I left with less education than I think it's Matt. So yeah, I barely got A levels. And then I tried to go to O levels. I barely got O levels. A levels, then I went to college after that and stayed for a week. Didn't get on there at all. And then it was really hard to get a job, but found jobs doing this, that, and the other. Ended up getting a good job in the end in an insurance company. And literally, I should have been there for the rest of my life. But I met somebody and had a relationship with somebody who was in university. And I was like, actually, he's not that clever. So maybe this idea of going to university isn't what I've thought it to be. And so I think I was about 20. I just sort of thought, well, that's what I want to do. I can't stand the world of work. I am bored. And I just can't do this forever. And so, yeah, I went home and said to my mum, my mum was reliant on my wage to pay the rent. And I went home and said, I'd really like to go to university. And she said, okay. And that was that. And I gave up my job and, got into community college, did an access course. And then went on. But it's been very, very, very messy. My whole experience with education has been very messy. This time around, doing my MA has been, I would say, the most positive experience of education I've had.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I mean, I a lot of that does resonate. I think there's the sort of wider questions of, for me, of entering the education system at 4 or 5 and encountering this very stuffy establishment middle class culture, middle class British culture, and I came at it very much as a second generation immigrant child, and so that had a big impact on me, the kind of alienness of that environment, but also as aware that there was there was a culture of school which was not a working class culture. It was definitely something from above that was being imposed on you, and that this was part of the process of getting you to behave, and that was a lot of what it was about, behavior. You being corrected in every possible way in terms of how you behaved in the playground, how you behaved in the classroom. And I think I didn't learn very much of academic value in primary school because it was primarily about trying to control you in some shape or form. And I'm not saying that that was true of most kids, because I think I could see there was a group of kids who kind of adjusted to that quite well. But I found it very alien, and I was bored. And I found that there was at 2 levels, a way of learning that I'd got mainly from television that was very engaging and stimulating. I could watch that and be with that for hours. And then there were lessons which were just, in comparison, unstimulating, stuffy, involving a lot of listening, sitting still, desk work. So the whole thing I found very sort of confining and restricting. I lived for the playground. I wasn't really interested in what was being taught in the lessons. It all seemed very worthy and earnest and boring. And also, I think that there was a certain antipathy towards the teachers and authority. And maybe that was particularly true of the area that I grew up in, sort of quite urban in the city. And there was a lot of violence against teachers. Teachers were stabbed, teachers were had things thrown at them. I mean, there was quite a lot of anti-authority. We were very deferential towards school, and we were convinced that our own way of learning was much better than anything the teachers wanted to teach you. And anyone who tried too hard would be a swat or be a teacher's pet. So there was that thing of you didn't really want to be too academic because you wouldn't have any friends. They were all ostracized, the kids who got on too well with teachers, or they would just be classed as geeks and freaks, and that was not how to be popular. Which wasn't to say that you couldn't be smart and popular, but there was a way of doing it. So and I certainly was not in either bracket, and I found it very difficult to try and adjust to that. And then I think as I kind of got through secondary school, found more and more that the way to survive secondary school was in fact just to socialize and not to bother with learning. And we just bunked off a lot. And I was convinced that, the way forward beyond school was not going to involve being in any other educational institution. I mean, my friends, the male friends, all wanted to be electricians. The young women all thought they could get jobs as nursery assistants, nursery nurses, and they were plausible, credible, respectable ways forward. Anyone who wanted to stay on at sixth form was just regarded as a bit of a loser. And I wanted to do music, even though I couldn't play anything. So that didn't involve going to university. No one I admired was at university. My sister had gone to university, and I had a little bit of an insight on what that was like, and that seemed pretty boring. Even though she was going partying all the time, it just seemed I could do that and not have to study. So I didn't value it. I don't know whether that was the school telling us that we were the sort who did go to university. Again, timing is kind of important because I started secondary school in 81. And that was, we're in an area where there'd been inner city riots. We then subsequently had the Wood Green riots in 84, 85. And that was great. We loved it. We were very carnivalesque about the whole thing. But there was a massive investment of funding into our school. When I joined that secondary school, it had amalgamated with another school which had a dreadful reputation where there had been teacher stabbings. But they built a new gym. It was sited next to a new state-of-the-art athletic stadium. We had, I think we were among the first kids to have computers in the classroom and to be doing computer studies. We had a fully, our metalwork and woodwork workshops were state-of-the-art. So there was this kind of investment. And then as we got to the point 5 years later, when it came to exams, the cuts arrived in 84, 85. And we were told we couldn't do the exams we wanted to because the local authority didn't have the money anymore. So we left feeling, this slight abandonment by the state, and we were just going to get on and do things. And I only ended up in university when I found some people who I actually liked, who I'd found out had gone to university, and then it started to become a good idea. But until then, I'd never met anyone I liked who'd gone to university. All the people who are my heroes hadn't been to university, or if they had, didn't make it sound like it had been something that was that important. Sorry, long answer, but that was.
No, you said something interesting earlier that resonated with me. You said something about the way we learn ourselves seemed better than the way the teachers taught us. And I must admit that was my sense at school. Obviously I have a slightly different sort of background because I come from a leftist organising family, and so when I was at school I was organising a youth CND group, and that was one of my main activities, like getting a youth CND group and all that. And I remember managing to sort of get access to the school print shop, and we ended up printing our newsletter in the school print shop. It was like, you know, one of those lunchtime things where someone would let you do something because you're not causing trouble, and we used it to like produce propaganda and all these kind of things. And everything at school was about getting away with stuff. You know, you're right. You know, they're there to control you. They've got nothing. They didn't seem to have anything particularly interesting to say. My earliest memory of like actual study was when I maybe 13, 14, and I went and I did a layaway in a local bookshop on a copy of Marx's Capital. Like you know, like this Lawrence and Wishart orange. I've still got it. It's one of my treasured possessions, actually. These Marx's Capital. I remember doing a layaway for like 6 weeks or something with my pocket money to buy this book, and then spending time studying that and asking my dad and some of the comrades that he had, you know, about how what was studying it. And that was like my earliest experience of study, autodidactic, you know, not. And it didn't seem like any of that was being taught in school. And aside from that, I was probably, by 15, I was involved in a group called Revolution Youth, and so there was educationals, and you know, we would be learning stuff and reading stuff and talking about it. So my experience of study was all from, you know, the workers' movement, if you like, in the working class movement or the revolutionary movement. It wasn't from university, and I think when I was in prison, I spent a lot of time reading. I mean, I came out of prison with 350 books, just under 350 books, you know, because people just sent books in all the time, which it's really difficult to do now. I've got a comrade in prison at the moment, and the prisons are massively problematically restricting access to books and all this kind of stuff. It's a real ridiculous situation. But I came out with something like 350 books, and I'd spent a lot of time reading in there, and so it was. And I'd continued to read afterwards because I didn't then get any work. And so that element of it, sort of, I think, was probably the nearest to pushing me into university. It was somewhere I could read. It was lots and lots of stuff to read. I remember we were at Dudley campus. It's a fairly working class university at the time. Dudley campus is closed now in Wolverhampton, but Wolverhampton University itself is quite an interesting university. And I remember going to Dudley campus, and it was like they just had this amazing library. They just had this huge library with, like you say, computer. I mean, that was the first time I saw computers. They had computers on it. This was 95, 96, and they were online at the time. It was before the web, but they were online, so you could talk to people in America. And I just remember thinking, oh, this is, you know, when I actually got there was lots and lots of resources to do stuff. But I remember having a chat with comrades before I went to university and saying, I'm going to drop out of the movement for a couple of years because I don't want to do student politics. I've got no interest in doing student politics. I don't want to get involved in like student societies and things like that, because everyone that was a student just seemed to me to be full of hot air and like super up themselves and super entitled and never thinking anything about, you know, who they were talking to. And I mean, curiously, it was a situation I remember when I was teaching philosophy at Greenwich, actually being able to see from the other side in my third year students. And I remember he used to say to my third year philosophy students about how, you know, watch yourself when you go down the pub, because you've done all this study now, you've done philosophy, you've got all these arguments, and you can take people's arguments apart. Don't do this in the pub. Don't do this as a chat up technique or a socializing technique, because all that will happen is you'll look like a complete twat. You know, you'll look like a wanker, and people will be really irritated with you. But you'll have this capacity to do it because you'll have all the smart words and the smart arguments, and you'll be able to make people, get stuck in a kind of, you know, a position that they didn't really hold, but you kind of negotiated them into it, and you'll be able to do all the kind of intellectual manipulation. But for God's sake, don't do it. You know, even if you feel like doing it. And that was my experience of a lot of university students, and is that they would make you feel small.
So I've got a question then for the three of you, or maybe for Julie. What exactly are we talking about then in relation to the title for the talk, working class experience and education?
I don't know. The thing that strikes me from all three of us is this actually not engaging with education, not and having this image of almost it not being for me and not about somebody like me not available to me, not even and not even as a conscious option. Just school was somewhere you went to get through, to leave, to go on to the next step in your life.
Very much. I think that it's not like part of the horizon. It wasn't, you know, and like you say, and school is a place. I mean, my wife's training as a teacher at the moment, and we've had these conversations, and I say to her, you have for me, the first thing to remember about secondary school is it's compulsory. People don't want to be there. You know, if all of your talk about pedagogy has to be premised on the first principle, which is they are being forced to be there, and if you don't remember that, then all the rest is bullshit. And yeah, that was it. It was like you had to go to school. The rest of it wasn't really on the horizon. So your experience, my experience, and I think a lot of our experiences is like school is a kind of enforcement, not an encouragement.
So what happens to working class and people, well, English people? I mean, because I have an experience in South Africa, which has some resonance with what you're talking, and also different. Which I don't want to go into because I want to keep the focus based on the UK context. But what happens when you go to university? What happens?
Can I just say just very quickly something else about what you do learn at school? Because you know, there wasn't much academically that I learned. I mean, but I did think I learned a lot about, you know, friendships and getting on with other children, and also what it's like to kind of need to look after yourself when your parents aren't about. I mean, but I don't think those were the things that, you know, were intended that in terms of education. I think I was lucky insofar as I went to school in that period before the national curriculum and after the 11 plus. You know, corporal punishment was just being phased out. So at primary school, you know, we were still whacked a few times, but that wasn't the case in secondary school. And you're aware of that shift, and that, you know, there was something called progressive education that was happening to you. And I think we did get, you know, certainly things like the history that I did, I don't think was anywhere on the national curriculum. We got as close as we could to getting, you know, a subject where being working class actually it was centered around that subject. So you were taught things about history that were relevant if you were from the working classes. And I was saying to you, we got taught sociology. So 15 or 16 being exposed to Paul Willis and Margaret Mead's, and, you know, being able to think about class and feminism. Again, you know, those were important for us. So there were some things that I did find at least stimulating and interesting. But I remember being in a maths class and we were really having a go at the teacher about what is the point of trigonometry? You know, I'm not going to fucking need it. And he said, yes, you will when you're building a garage. And it just illustrated the generational gap between our teachers' aspirations and the things that we really wanted to do with education and we're going to find useful. And, you know, I think a lot of it was to do with the things that we were taught and the style in which we were taught, which made it, you know, quite alienating. And coming back to Matt's point about, you know, you find your own ways of learning and your experience of library, certainly in the time when you were inside, you know, the library was a massive resource. You know, you just got to learn how to use it. I was obsessed with music, so I just took out every book to do with you know, pop music that I could find, and, you know, read that stuff voraciously. So there is stuff that you're taking in. It's just not authorized. It's not the stuff that's going to get you qualifications. So I just wanted to throw that in just before we kind of move on from the primary and the secondary school.
No, I mean, maybe if I can just throw something in as well. I mean, I suppose my experience was very much being labeled in a particular way, where you're labeled as stupid, as backward, as there's something wrong, as a difficult kid at school, the one who gets the beatings or whatever. and you see these other kids in, because we had a grading system from like A to F, and I think, or A to G, and so there were the A class, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, whatever, and I think I was in the second lowest one, and the sense that those in the A class will be going off. They're from privileged backgrounds. They'll be going off to university one day. And my aspirations were to collect tickets in a cinema because I liked watching movies. I thought, well, that'll be nice. I never kind of expected to finish school. I did have dreams. I thought I'd love to be a game ranger or a vet, but I thought I'll never get those kinds of qualifications. But also the sense of shaming of that you haven't got what the other kids have, so that you then kind of affirm yourself in a physical way, on the sports field, in a macho way, because you're not quite like the other kids. And then when I entered, I only got a university pass thanks to a teacher who took me under my table tennis coach. And it was thanks to him. I don't think I would have ever got in. And I had a capacity to remember things. So when I got into university, it was like cultural shock. And I remember I basically stayed at home in my room, just learning everything off by heart, because that's the only thing I knew. And I knew I had a memory. So I would just learn everything off by heart. But there was also the sense of social embarrassment. Kids would laugh at how I dressed, things like that. So it was quite a shaming process in a way, and alienating process, and complex. I mean, the South African situation is not the UK situation. It's very different. It was only strangely in my very last year of university where I was having an affair, and I didn't have time to. I was having this passionate love relationship, and I didn't have time to really learn everything off by heart, that I actually started to think for the first time. So I had to actually try to. And then I had the embarrassment every single exam, and this was throughout. They would say, you can't spell, because we didn't have things like dyslexia. I didn't know about things like dyslexia. I was just told I was stupid. You can't spell. You've got some nice ideas. We get a pass you, but you shouldn't pass. That kind of stuff.
What was your experience of university like then? You said you wanted to go, Julie, so you fancied it, and it sounded good, and it seemed like, it wasn't the person that you knew that there wasn't so bright after all, so you could definitely get along. So what was your experience like?
Yeah, I could only afford to go. Sorry?
Where'd you go to start with?
I studied at it's Liverpool John Moores, which used to be the Poly, but is now Liverpool John Moores University. And it was Liverpool John Moores when I went. But I had no idea. I mean, it's interesting you talk about the library, Riyadh, because I just didn't know how to use a library. And I didn't know about indexes in books. I didn't know how to search up a book. I still feel uncomfortable now sometimes. That's going away, but to sit in a university library is sometimes can feel quite uncomfortable still. But definitely for my first university at John Moores, my first degree at John Moores, I'd sit in the library because that's what students did, but I couldn't work in the library. I didn't know what I was supposed to do in the library. So a really strong memory I have at the very beginning is one, I need to change. I need to change. Everything about me is wrong, including my accent. And that's difficult because when you're going to university in your own city and people are coming to live in that city as a student, and they're talking about your community in a negative way, that's like you're sort of caught in between. Well, I'm not like them, and also, you know, who do they think they are as well? And also, when I went to university, I didn't know that part of the city. That was my city. I didn't know. It was like I had gone away to study, because I just didn't know the bars. I didn't know the streets. So it was like a whole new world. And being surrounded by all these people who could put on their, you have to say what your parents' jobs were. Like, and they were all right now, doctors and teachers, and I couldn't put that. I didn't have any profession to put down on the slip, and I just felt so embarrassed handing that slip in to the university member of staff. Like, what are they going to think of me? So yeah, it was a whole mixture of stuff. And yeah, I don't know how I got through my first degree. I don't know how I got a 2-2, and I was embarrassed about that forever until now. I'm really proud of it. Now I feel very proud of that. But yeah, I didn't know how to write an essay or anything. Didn't know how to read a textbook. I'd never really looked at a textbook. It's like crazy, absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I mean, mine was a bit different in a way, because I mean, when I went to Wolves University, as I say, it's a working class university. Most of the people who go there are from the local area, probably 60-70% at that time. And when I was teaching at Greenwich, actually, it was a similar kind of thing. Like 50-60% of the people that were there were from Woolwich and local areas at the time I was teaching. But when I went to Dudley, Wolverhampton University Dudley campus, almost everyone there was working class. So we you got on quite well. That was the dominant culture, and it was the joy of learning. I mean, I remember spending those 3 years learning philosophy and just having an absolute joyous time, in many ways, because I kind of had stepped aside from politics a bit, so I didn't have lots of meetings, and I used to spend Thursday, Friday nights at the bar, we set up a philosophy society. It was the first time there was a full honours philosophy degree, everything you did was philosophy, and there was kind of thing. I remember one of the lecturers, this lecturer called Bruce Young, who was just this fantastic guy, this Scottish guy who taught phenomenology and came from a Marxist background. But I remember he used to do things like jump on top of the desks in the middle of the lectures, and we would stand on the desks while lecturing us. And the first lecture I ever saw him was in a big hall with about 160 people in it. Everyone in the whole humanities, was there for the first year. And he used to he had a mic on his radio mic on. He'd walk up and down the hall lecturing, and then he'd take questions. And it was it was a fantastic space. And so I came out with a really nice, I came out with a first and an honours and all this kind of stuff, and thought I was actually, like, in some sense, validated. I felt really quite, like this is a really good thing. And then I'd bought into, going on. So I went to do a master's. And I come from Brighton, so we wanted to move back to Brighton. So I went down to Sussex, and from that moment, it was just catastrophic. It was just a complete, absolute disaster in many ways, because that was completely the opposite experience. It was traditional, formal, sit down. Everyone's dressed in a certain sort of way. By this point, it's masters. Everyone's got plenty of money, so I'm having to work. At the time, I was working nights in a psychiatric outhouse, where people have come out of hospital, and it was, so I'm working. I've got a young kid, no shared experiences. I'm 3 or 4 or 5 years older than them, and I got through my master's, and then I started to do a PhD. And by the middle of the PhD, I was like, I remember one point at which I actually couldn't go to the university campus, because every time I thought of going, I'd have a panic attack. And I'd get on the bus to go up, the 25 bus to go up the Lewis Road to campus. And by the time I got there, I was just dripping in sweat. And so I would actually disappear to the library. I would spend all my time just hiding from the rest of the students. And I think I used to meet my supervisor for my PhD like once every 3 months. And we had a really, really good conversation. He was a good philosopher. He trained me well. But it was just this, the whole experience after the actual undergrad was a kind of encounter with the fact that it didn't matter how good I was. Actually, I really didn't fit. And the further I went down that experience, it was more and more that I really didn't fit. until I got to Greenwich, and that was actually a really nice experience. I spent nearly 10 years teaching there with like 3 or 4 of us in the 4 of us in the philosophy department, and they basically let me pretty much do what I want. And so I remember teaching third years Nietzschean philosophy by Deleuze, and Nietzsche in the Vicious Circle by Pierre Klosowski, and like these completely bonkers books that you really shouldn't be teaching third years. And I remember just doing all sorts of really strange things there. Taking we used to go and sit outside and have the lessons in the park outside, where the Greenwich Observatory is and all this kind of stuff, and just having a lot of freedom at Greenwich, and then just that being crushed as they began to shut philosophy departments down. And it was only then that I moved into the Free University and started working in the Free University. But my experience with university as an undergraduate was great. My experience with academics after that has been horrific and catastrophic in many ways. I just find it almost impossible to get on with now. And so I think there's a lot, and a lot of that's quite. I've been reading this really interesting book just recently. I don't know that one. You can see that one. I would suggest it's American. It's an American experience, American book. But one of the things she goes.
Sorry, what's it called?
It's called The Melancholia of Class. And that actually, there's been a lot in there. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, you can. There's been a lot in there that's been very resonant about like. The fact that inside academia, once you've sort of gone through your undergraduate and you're kind of inside it, the erasure of the concept of working class actually becomes quite problematic. So you have all these other things, but that erasure leaves you. She talks about this notion of melancholia, this sense of like you become dissolved. You kind of disappear in this situation. And I found that was essentially my experience of being an academic. It is this continual erasure, and inside philosophy, obviously, it's quite easy to do that. Quite often you wouldn't be talking about sociological structures or issues, so you wouldn't have any. You wouldn't necessarily think, it's not coming up. That concept's not there, but it's erasure throughout. I think is deeply problematic. And it's been really nice to see in the last few years working class academics actually beginning to, self-help is not quite the right word. Come together, reaffirm each other. Go. Actually, we are here. We're not empty. We're not disappeared. We're not irrelevant. We are part of the structure. And universities have changed a lot in Britain since the undergrad times I went there. In the mid-90s, obviously they've massively changed in the last 20 years. But I still think that erasure of the sense of working class. And one of the things that Cynthia Cruz talks about in her book there is that this is one of the key elements of what people go on about when they say neoliberalism. It's a kind of buzzword. Oh yeah, the neoliberal. But they often think it's something to do with economics or politics or state. But one of the key things is there's no working class anymore. That doesn't exist. And that is not just, but it's not just for the working class outside of academia and education. That's just generally, you're not allowed to exist like that. And I've noticed, I think, some hopeful sense in which that is possibly being, resisted a little bit now. And there's some moves to try and, reaffirm that. I think in some sense as a kind of result of what people call identity politics. People are learning from trans comrades, black comrades who identify themselves, and people are learning that actually that might be a valuable thing to do, to identify yourself and actually say, no, I'm working class, and I think that could be something that could be an interesting development, and I think could then fold back into schools where, what working class experiences can be acknowledged, but also the positive activity of working class people, their creativity, their capacity to learn, to survive, to move, to do all these kind of things. That needs to be reaffirmed. The kind of jobs that people find powerful and interesting, that needs to be reaffirmed. I remember my job experience interview, and I ended up being told, oh, well, you could probably be a nurse. And that was about it, I was like, well, I quite fancy being a mechanic. Oh, you don't want to do that. No, my dad's an engineer. Oh, no, you don't want to do that. Maybe be a nurse. You can get 5 O levels. You can be a nurse. It's like.
Yeah, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just sort of reflecting on Matt and Julie's comments in terms of where you went to university, and the you know the group of people that you then had to socialize with, or that you found yourself kind of um, channeled into their field, um, and just reflecting on how I managed to what my experience was negotiating that. I did have 3 years, so I did leave. I left school at 16. I went and did a YTS for a bit, and then that didn't work out. So I did A levels for about 9 months, and frankly was bored with that, and left and went into work at 17, and remained in work until I was 21. And that, I suppose, what I was describing earlier, that kind of autonomy that you were slightly taught, in terms of looking after yourself, trying to get on in the world, and finding out how things worked, and not necessarily being dependent on school and I suppose the established structures for telling you what to do, did kind of hold me in good stead. I mean, I did end up in a good job, got a good office job in a local authority, was earning a reasonable amount of money. So by the time I went to university, I did feel like, I had learned to look after myself quite well, and felt when I was admitted as a mature student, and only with one A level, and not a very good A level at that. And it was slightly similar to kind of, you Matt, being put to a test to see, can you do this? I'd been invited for an interview, and I was just able to kind of bang on at length about Coriolanus, and they said, we'll give you a place. But my social group was the other mature students, and they ranged from people like me who are in their 20s to people in their 40s, and they were all working class. A good friend of mine, very very able, had been a trade unionist for years and years, but loved literature. And so most of my undergraduate years were spent with a group of other mature students who knew the value of not having to go to work, and actually enjoyed the experience of being let off the hook for a number of years, just to kind of do study this stuff. And it was still in the period when you could get a grant. I think we were the last intake that had access to the grant. And so although there were money worries, it wasn't the same as being in debt in order to pay for your education. And I think it was only when in postgraduate classes that I became aware of, I suppose, in the student body, that there were now young people from much more privileged backgrounds, because doing undergraduate studies, the people who were teaching me had been taught by left-wing Marxists, particularly Raymond Williams in kind of cultural studies. And so you felt like you were getting an education that was linked to class politics, that was linked to, I don't know, radical feminism. So you were kind of in touch with those libertarian currents. So you thought you were still moving in the direction of getting an education on how to critique society. But when it came to postgraduate studies, because by then the department had got quite a reputation, was attracting people from Oxbridge, you suddenly were then mixing with people who were not, who'd arrived into education from a very more, I suppose, more conventionally, elitist route. And I did find that much more difficult, and didn't really enjoy that. It brought out all my class antagonism towards this group, unfortunately. So that was less happy, actually, consequently. But undergraduate years, I think, were very good. And obviously it gets tougher once you're into postgraduate studies. You're then with all the people who get firsts, and that's a much more competitive environment. And you're challenged a bit more, I suppose.
And if it's okay, if I wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit. I know we're supposed to be focusing on the UK context, but I suppose in the South African context, there was the British educational system. But Julie, when you spoke about the libraries, I remember sitting in the libraries, and it would take me about 2-3 hours to read 2 pages. I didn't understand. I just looked at the words, and I read it again and again, and I couldn't. So I wasn't, in that sense, I wasn't trained in actually reading books. It was so difficult. It was hard. And the other thing which was so damn difficult was, one is my spelling, my grammar. So the structuring of the way that you have to write to present an essay. But so there was that, and I suppose that relates to the question of cultural capital, or learning a certain grammar, or just conforming. But then there was the magic of the ideas. Oh, it was like, my God, are there ideas like this out there? And in sociology, I just remember they were critiquing education, teaching. I remember the whole thing about teaching people about school is about teaching people about winners and losers, so you know your position in society. And I was thinking, wow. And then coming across Marx, it was just like, wow. And then starting to speak to some people. So there was exchanging in ideas, but then you also had to write these exam systems. And postgraduate, I got into the whole Buddhist stuff. So I suppose what I was starting to learn, that you could have thoughts, you could think. And one of the things I reflected on a lot is 2 things really. Foucault once said, he was asked about what it was like to become the professor. He says these things are just like passports. I don't think he used the word passports, but he implied that. It's people who don't have these titles who imagine that they mean something. He says they don't mean anything. And I subscribe to that viewpoint. It's people who don't have these titles who think they mean something. And one of the things I've realized, for example, is that my mom can really, really think. And I started to learn that a lot of academics can recite ideas, but they can't think. Now, some can recite ideas and think, but a hell of a lot cannot think. And then the second time going back to university, then it was very different. Then I was starting to argue with all the lecturers, and actually starting to find, hey, actually, I can think things my lecturers can't think. So that was very interesting. But the only reason I went back to university was I realized I needed a certain kind of qualification in a workplace to be taken seriously. I was working in a children's home, and I was a care worker, and the social workers were putting all this rank on me. And I thought, I'm working with the kids. I know what I'm doing. But I realized I needed a certain qualification. So I thought, okay, well, I'll go and get a social work qualification. So that was learning that you need these certain passports to be able to navigate certain spaces. What's it like for the 3 of you? Because I realized I was going to just take this position of trying to facilitate this conversation, but I've been triggered a bit listening to this. So this is the therapist in me speaking, but I'm just curious, what's it like for the 3 of you just to have this conversation? Yeah.
I did a little bit of reflecting on this because I think it did bring home to me a bit that, I wasn't, I mean, I'm not particularly skilled in the scholastic way of doing things. I mean, it takes me I've got to concentrate really, really hard on it in order to get somewhere. And I can get some good insights when I do, but it's a real mental effort. And I can't say I find it very easy. So that was quite an insight that, there's a kind of knowledge, but it's not necessarily a scholastic knowledge that I value necessarily. So that was good for me to kind of reflect on that, and also about the the politics of the period when I was in school and and the politics of education, how that's kind of shifted over time. But yeah, I think it's and also just hearing you guys has been fantastic, because I don't think this gets discussed enough. And without necessarily wanting to be have a chip on the shoulder about it, I do think this is really good stuff to just explore, because I can see I've been shaped by a lot of this. When you talk about, how difficult it was to kind of absorb some of the stuff. I mean, it was written in a foreign language.
Exactly.
A lot of the stuff that, when you start opening up academic books. I mean, I was being exposed to, post-structuralist philosophy in year one, and I'd never read anything like this. So there was a big divide. If you lived in pop culture, and you got bits of information from pop culture, and all of a sudden just have to imbibe high theory. And I got told off when I said this is all gobbledygook. And my lecturer just said, stop being a reactionary. You have to just read it and get your head around it, which was a fair challenge. But I remember another lecturer saying to me, this is more style than substance, because I'd been used to writing in a very journalistic, tabloidy way, and that's what I regarded as, decent writing, because I hadn't been exposed to highbrow literature and highbrow philosophy or highbrow theory. If you're at school and you don't have classes where they teach you how to write an essay, composition, we did a few, but no one took any interest in it. So you lost whole years during primary and secondary school of being able to compose your ideas on paper, and then you're suddenly hit with it when you got to go to university to write an essay. It took me got a lot of red lines through things. Can't say this, can't say that. Whole use of first person. Put it in the impersonal voice. This is too chatty and colloquial. This is very tabloidy and headliney, but it's lacking ideas. You are being trained in a particular discipline. Not saying there's anything. I mean, it's a very positive one, but your schooling leaves you entirely unprepared for it, I have to say. So that very resonated for me, what you said about going into the library and reading a book and spending 2 hours and not getting anywhere.
I just want to throw in another quick comment. Sorry, can I just quick comment? Getting involved with political movements when the ANC and the Communist Party, and I realize now it was the whole Paulo Ferreira stuff, but it was like, wow, is a whole nother way of thinking, analyzing stuff. Workshops, it was just so eye-opening, and again made me start to question in terms of how does one learn, how does one think, thinking about education from a grassroots perspective. Hence my question from the very beginning, that you can do these things in very different kinds of ways, because it was very much, and being taught these tools in terms of running workshops and thinking and critiquing. That was just like so eye-opening. It was so exciting.
Yeah, I was going to ask Julie, actually. I mean, what's your thoughts on this? Because I'm not sure. Eric didn't introduce your interest in this topic, so I'd be interested in hearing that as well.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think, if I'm honest, my interest is really getting voices of my friends and family heard. Really, that's it. It's not like I've got any great passion to be, spokesperson for working class people. It's just I feel like, I don't know. I think because I'm the person who went to university, I have a responsibility to make sure that where I come from, the group I come from, and those experiences, I don't know, are at the table. And it's But it's difficult because it's a really emotional thing for me to talk about this. It's quite difficult for me to talk about the things we've been talking about and stay in, I don't know, distanced from it, really. And I feel like I'm forever battling that in these situations. So yeah, I don't know why I'm here. Really, that's my real honest answer is I don't know why I'm here. I don't know how I even got here.
Well, Julia, we had a
that's Eric for you. I find that he's very good at getting people into conversations in all sorts of strange places.
Julie, if I can maybe just put you a little bit on the spot. So we had this discussion group on WhatsApp, and we were all involved on class. And you were writing your MA thesis, which you did extremely well in. You got a first in it on psychotherapy in class. And yet somehow there was a reluctance. So I hope if I'm stepping across the line, but there was a reluctance to share it in the group. And I would have thought that perhaps that was partly part of your interest, because this podcast I'm wanting to share with my students as a way of getting them, people who go into practice as therapists, to get them to think about class, and you're very passionate about that. So I don't know if you want to respond to that in any way.
I think it's about it's about remembering that it's not just class, it's the person. So we can talk about class as much as we like, but actually what we've been talking about is three people's experiences of how they got to where they got today through the education system. And not pigeonholing people either, because I think there's also this romantic notion that it's almost like if you're working class and poor, but you're incredibly bright, and you go through school and you're so bright, and somebody will pick up on it and go, oh, you're so marvelous, and then you that's how you get on this journey and end up at whatever, an MA, PhD, whatever you get. But that's certainly not my experience. I really feel like I stumbled my way through this very difficult, complicated minefield, and I'm not quite sure why I did it. I don't know, because I've distanced myself from my family and my friends. It's like I've had two different lives and I'm two different people.
So, Julie, in terms of the students, the counselling students, what would you hope that them watching this, I hope that some of them do watch this, what would you hope that they would take this in terms of becoming counsellors, therapists one day? Because you've reflected on this.
Yeah, I think, read my dissertation, and which I think is it in the library, actually, Eric? I have no idea what.
If you're okay with that, I'll share it with them as part of the reading list.
Yeah, put it in there. And I mean, I think that says everything I've got to say. That is like, that was an argument. I was kind of having an argument with myself, but also with all these people who think they've got the answer to everything when they've got the answer to nothing. We're all just holding up this system, which is an unfair system. And unless we really recognize that and recognize that some of us are benefiting from keeping that system in place and how we're affecting our clients by doing that.
Oh, I'd like to hear more about. I can't get access to the library, so how? Not to that library. I know how to use libraries, but I can't get into them all.
I know you know how to use a library. It's me who doesn't know how to use a library. No, I'm very good at using the library now. But
That's another way of saying I'd like to, you should send it over, or maybe to do a presentation. It would be good.
No, we're not doing a presentation. God, that's terrifying. Yeah. And I think the other reason I wouldn't share it is because I just automatically assume that people are going to tell me, no, you're wrong. You're wrong. And just be quiet, go away. The world, it's not like that. You've got it all wrong. And we know better. So when I handed that dissertation in, I really didn't know what reaction I'd get. Half of me expected to get a really sour message from some of the tutors, just kind of going, who do you think you are? You can't write this. This isn't, basically pulling apart everything you've just learnt. And to be honest, I think, Eric, if you went from South Africa or educated in a different country to this, I think possibly you would have had a problem with what I'm saying in it as well. I think you were more open to because it's not as personal to you, I think.
And just one other question for you, Julie. There's an echo somewhere. We three men, and you're a woman. Is there a gendered factor when one thinks about class and education, or not? I mean, I suppose, yeah, well, obviously, but I just wanted to put that out there. Yeah.
I think there is, in the sense of, I mean, all of the usual stuff about, women are supposed to care for, whether it's, their siblings, their mother, their grandparent, whatever it is. You've got this side that you're not supposed to go and get these things that you want or you can go and get them, but don't be so obvious about it.
But I mean, how would someone from a woman from a working class background, the gender perspective, be different from a woman from a middle class or upper class background?
Well, I think the thing that comes to mind really is that you have males who are not able to access what you're accessing, and so you're on the end of that sort of their feelings of not being masculine enough, because you've risen above them in their mind. You've risen above them, and so I remember being at university and getting a really hard time from males in my family, from males who were brothers of my friends, because who do you think you are? They don't want to listen. But I'm not really sure what that's about. And you'd have to ask, I don't know what that's about. Yeah.
And we think there's something really interesting about this kind of this doubled experience. And I think it's something that, I mean, to go back to that sort of sense in which, what people call identity politics, or what that sort of the discourse around identity, one of the things that's kind of like got into the fore is the relationship to sort of doubled identities and zones of non-being, these kind of things. And I think there's an enormous analogy sometimes with working class life about this that can be drawn on from that. And so and to me a lot it took me a long time to realize that university education wasn't about me learning something about myself, or me learning, rather actually it was a game of me presenting something to someone else. And and then for a while I kind of, I think I tried to engage in that game, but just was shit at it. And that was like during the PhD, I remember that being like a major crisis point, and getting to the point of realizing at a certain sort of few years in, I was doing it part-time and working, but so it took a while. But I remember getting to a certain point and thinking, actually everything I've written so far is bollocks, and then just starting afresh. And like, I think I was like 6 years in, and just completely starting, like taking all of the things I had and just kind of cut and pasting and rewriting the whole thing. And I remember my introduction to that PhD was something along the lines of, the dirty little secret of all philosophers is that it's not going to change anything in the world, but it is going to change something about you. You are going to get changed if you do it, and that's why people do philosophy, not because they've got answers, but because they want to change themselves. And that coming to that realization, that like a long way down the line, and going through that kind of weird crisis of like, well, I can't work out how to do this presentation thing. Every time I do one, it sounds weird. It always seems. I remember people saying, you speak too fast and you're really aggressive. You're really aggressive. You sound really angry all the time. You're really aggressive. And I was like, I'm passionate, and and actually having to train myself, and I'm still not very good at it, to train myself not to get passionate, because everyone would see it as being aggressive. So I'd have to like keep my mouth shut. And Eric's seen me do this in reading groups where I open my mouth and I suddenly seem like I'm trying to knock people sideways, and it's just like I'm not trying to do that, but it's part of this kind of constant monitoring of myself in those situations. Because if I speak as I would with comrades, or as I would with my family, or as I would with my mates, then it becomes unacceptable. It becomes untenable. People don't get it. People don't understand it. It makes them uncomfortable. And you can see visibly it making them uncomfortable, and it's not what you're trying to do. So and so there's still this monitoring, which is not a terrible thing, because when you're trying to teach, it's useful to have a bit of have a little bit of a kind of monitor in your head about how are you coming across and all this sort of stuff. But one of the things I've found that's interesting in the last couple of years, teaching online and teaching mainly through verbal, mainly through talking, is actually it's far preferable for me than teaching through writing. I think it's a far more powerful way of dealing with things, and it's far more interesting. But then there's also specific kind of curious experiences. I remember learning philosophy, and philosophy is a very technical subject in many ways. And so I learned it like I would engineering. I learned it like I would how to take apart a bike or something. I mean, you'd learn how to get the bit, and I even now still call it conceptual engineering. I'm not the only one to do it that, but I still think of myself as a kind of engineer when it comes to ideas, because it's the only way I can kind of it's the only way I can kind of be myself in the relationship to that. It's not like it's an argument and something. It's like, if I fix this bit here and stick this bit in and move this bit around, then I can get there, or it will stop me going in the other direction. And that's still how I think about thinking. There's a thought that you want to try and get to, or there's a thought you want to try and prevent, or there's a thought that you want to try and counter. So what's the kind of machinery of being able to do this? But yeah, that kind of doubled experience of why you're doing it, who you're doing it for, whether it's a front and it's out there, or whether it's something to do with here. I think that's not acknowledged in education generally. I think it's education is just not really focused on the idea that it's transformative. It's focused on this idea that it's, like you were saying, it's a passport or something.
Is that why you got involved in the Free University? And maybe for people watching, they might not know what the Free University is.
When I got made redundant in 2013, I'd literally the Free University just started, and I taught a course on philosophy. I think that's the first sort of academic course that the Free University taught, because it also does like lots of practical courses at the time. And it was not having to grade people, not having to assess people, not having to get them to write stupid essays that they didn't really, not having to go through the motions. And the conversations were all about, everyone's interest in the idea was about how it affected them, how it made them think about their life, how it made, what about this? If I think about my mum's relationship to my dad in this way, using this idea, or if I, that makes, it makes more sense than I just thought they were arguing for nothing. Or, there was a lot of kind of personal use, in inverted commas, of the ideas we were talking about. And when people were talking about existentialism and freedom, I remember teaching that, and people just being very focused on the sort of sensation of freedom and the kind of experience of freedom and the limits of it, and they weren't particularly interested in whether Kierkegaard's arguments were better than Hegel's, or whether Nietzsche was a better existentialist than Kierkegaard. They were just, they were, and that encouraged me to keep working on those moments that are beautiful, the moments that are interesting, the moments that seem to stick in your head, and that for some reason you can't quite work out why that line keeps going around in your head, and what it is about that line that seems important, or what it is about that idea that seems important. And I think that to me is what education should be about, those bits that get hold of you and can enable you to transform and move and shift and feel like you're open, feel like you can become something else if you want to, and feel like you've got options, feel like you've got horizons. Whereas education is focused very much on pass the frigging exam, get a bit of paper, go and get your job, selection for work in a way. And which is, I mean, people have to do that, so there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, my daughter's having to do it at the moment. She's a social worker, and she's having to go to university in order to be able to go for the next sort of, the next level. But I mean, that's it. That I think that's a kind of functional role for education, not a transformative.
That question, maybe I could ask Riyad and Julie. What would you like education to be for, or how would you? Just you heard Matt speak about that. I'm still a bit worried, Julie, that you. Are you okay about being here now? I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope you're enjoying this. I hope you're enjoying this. But education for what? How would you guys like to see education?
Well, I think just coming back to, I think something that you're talking about, Julie, it seemed to me the quandary is, once you get it, what do you do with the stuff? So, I mean, that I found it a bit heartrending that you do all of this work but you anticipate such a degree of hostility to what you've got to say. And then you don't, it's not something that, in terms of being able to put it out there, now you've got it. In fact, that's quite an uncomfortable experience. And that's both within the institution. So coming back to Matt's point, be careful, guys, girls, when you go out to the pub, and don't start using this stuff because you're going to look like an idiot. Or you might end up in a fight with someone because, they won't understand what you're talking about, and, you'll get cross with them, or vice versa. And you also describe something in terms of gender and, outside of university and how men respond to you. So, you've got this whole thing about you get all of this stuff. You can't use it within the university because, it's too incendiary and controversial and they won't hear it. The response is likely to be destructive towards you. And if you take it outside of university, then, that also seems really problematic. So and I think that's always a difficulty, I don't know that that's just to do with gender. It's like once you've had all this stuff injected into you, and then you've got to go about normal life still, with people who haven't studied studied what you've studied, haven't read the books that you have, and they've got their own views. They want to talk to you about their own things, and you don't want to appear too clever, or where do you begin with doing something with the information you're given, and that you spend a lot of time thinking about and developing. So that's more a question. You're the facilitator, but I was very struck by the quandary of what do you do with this stuff then?
I don't know. I think I've actually struggled with that since I've finished the course, actually, not quite knowing what to do with it. So I've got this thing, I've got this knowledge. What do I do with it? What good is it? And I think if it changes if one person, and I think Eric is doing this, so it does make it worthwhile. The very fact that we're having this conversation, and there's an interest now at Goldsmiths on the course about class, it's like, well, okay, it was worth it. That's what it was for. Because there was nothing, which was bizarre to me. I went to Goldsmiths. I could have studied at Tavistock or whatever, and I'd already done a postgraduate diploma there, and it was just so white middle class. and there was no room for original thought at all. And I picked Goldsmiths because I thought, yeah, no, they're going to be open to all sorts of things, and they're going to, you know, be interested in class. And then it just wasn't really an issue, except that it really felt like there was something against people who were working class and poor, who didn't live in London. and I had to just be quiet because, and the people who were making comments on the course had never visited these places or talked to these people. But you can't, it's difficult. So yeah, so I don't know. It's been a really odd time since I finished at Goldsmiths, knowing that I've got this dissertation, but what am I going to do with it? Don't know. It helped me with my clients, and it's helped me work stuff out for myself. So that's it, really.
Could you share a bit about
when you say that's it, and I think like actually that's something we really need to like go, no, that is it, and that is important, and this is what you're doing it for. You know, you're doing it so that, and because I think this, when Eric was talking about the difference between like being able to recite ideas and being able to think, you know, it's like it's at the point at which you begin to have begin to think a bit, that it begins to change something, and you begin to learn, and you actually, and like you say, it might help with clients, it might have some functional role, but its functional role in the end is to give you it gives you greater capacity in some sense. It gives you, more of you. You find out more about yourself, more about you, and you it's not quite like. But I was talking to my daughter about this the other day because she wants to go to university. As I say, she's doing this social work stuff, and I was saying, if you want to, she's very good at the gym. She knows how to work the gym. So I was talking to her. It's like a gym, Rosie. You have to go and like reading is like going and starting on your weights, and you can't do it at first, and you have to start learning how to do it. Do your little reps, and do your 20 minutes. Do your Pomodoro or whatever you need to do, techniques to do it, and build it up. But it's like any kind of practice like that. And once you've done it for a while, I can't go to the gym and lift 150 kilograms, but I can sit down and read a book in an evening. And so there's certain things you can do that it enables you to do, and also there's certain resiliences it can give you when you're faced with a crappy world. Not all the time, because sometimes it can lead you into disastrous areas of like self-doubt and all sorts of terrible things. But often there's a kind of resilience, because you can kind of think, well, it's not just insane, it's not just stupid. There are kind of things that you can kind of get to grips with as to why this might be happening. Can't quite work out how to change it very easily, but you can kind of have explanations or kind of understandings about how things that seem bonkers are going on in the world. So I think that sense of it changing us and giving us stuff generally needs to be encouraged, in terms of people encountering education. It's like, and that's so difficult in secondary schools, because if they're forced to be there, you're immediately in this kind of problematic situation. Whereas at least in universities, that option of like, you're here, you're the one that's going to change. The rest of it is just a game, just a game, just like learning a language, just like learning some strange language and having to speak in some strange alien tongue for a while. But in the end, the stuff that matters is what we can do, with ourselves that's different to what we could do before.
Mm-hmm.
We should probably end soon. Were there any comments in terms of how you have found it helpful working with clients, take into consideration?
I mean, class was always there for me anyway. So, but I use it with every single one of my clients, like the whole notion of power and class, and I don't know if I hadn't written the dissertation, I don't know if that would be different or not, because it's so much a part of who I am anyway, or what I'm interested in or whatever. So I don't know. Yeah.
I'm not sure how we should bring this conversation to an end, and maybe I'm imposing an end. So apologies if it feels like a premature end.
No, I think you need to impose an end, otherwise your students won't be able to watch anything. An
Well,
hour and a half, an hour and a half of us is enough of them listening.
That's what I was actually thinking, to be quite honest. I was thinking of them watching it. Parting thoughts from each of you? Things you're going to take from this conversation, or last things you want to add?
I think there is. Oh, go on, Matt.
I would say I think that there's a lot of reasons as to why class has been erased from conversation, discourse, universities and education. Most of those are political, but the effects are personal. They're deeply felt by people, and it puts people in very strange situations. And those situations are as strange as people who are black in a white society, people who are trans they are equivalent to that. They are analogous to that, and it's something that's happened as part of neoliberalism that's deeply felt internally. It's not some abstract political thing. It is part of people's living experience, this kind of strange double life erasure. Not talking about it, not acknowledging it, is actually being complicit in continuing to erase it.
Ria,
do you want to go next? Because I'm not sure.
I think for me, there is something that's been lost in the way that we've been taught at schools, and the way that the consequent education system through primary, secondary, further and higher education, it is very much informed by a model of churning people out for the economy that's got worse and worse over the last 30 or so years. And I would go back to that kind of progressive education moment, Alex Bloom, St George's in the East, the kind of progressive approach to giving young people a place to think, rather than this kind of scholastic approach of lessons and regimentation. I'd also go back in terms of the purpose of education for the working class is how do we get knowledge of our situations with the view to changing it. And going back to Alexander Bogdanov, the guy who founded Product Cult, one of Lenin's one-time comrades, who spent some time in the field after 1905, running informal classes for the workers, and they just wanted to pillage his brains for knowledge of things that they needed. And instead of having our heads crammed with the crap that the ruling class wants us to know, it's about arming ourselves with human knowledge to kind of change our own situations. And that's what I think is why education is so political, and why we don't get to learn what we need to learn to some extent.
I think my parting words are just going to really be based on doing the training, really. And I think just that class exists, and if people tell you it doesn't, or it doesn't matter, it does. And think about how you are responding to others on the course. Think about how you're responding to your tutors. Think about how you're responding to your clients when you get some, and how many of those responses are based on preconceptions around class. Because you'll probably be surprised that if you really think about it, there's an awful lot going on inside each and every one of us, whether, you're biased against people because they're posher than you, or you perceive them to have more than you, or you think they're thick because they speak in a particular way, or of the clothes they wear, whatever it is. I just think be aware.
That was great. Thank you all. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Riyadh. Thank you, Matt.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Julie, I'll be contacting you for a copy of your thesis to put on the. I'll be sharing it on the reading list. Absolutely.
No one will read it. That's fine. That's fine.
Some of them will. Some of them. Oh, it's always some of them.
Some of them.
Yeah, some of them. I'm going to play Stokely Carmichael again.
The gorilla studies. The gorilla studies. He doesn't rap. He studies and keeps his mouth shut. Study, children, study.
Right, there we go. Study. It's good for you. Study. Anyway, lovely to meet you all.
Yeah,
thanks,
take care.
Thanks for staying up. Nice
See
seeing
you
you.
soon.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.
I'm going to chuck you out. Yep. See you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, that was it. Eric is no doubt passing this on to people he needs. And if you happen to see this, feel free to get in touch and have a chat. Twitch.tv/Raise a Smile. Monday evenings, I will be doing philosophy and there's other stuff that goes on. Thanks a lot. See you soon.